Thank you, excellent. Hello, everyone. So I wanted to carry on looking at our sugya and trying to understand now Shittas Rashi, the view of Rashi. We discussed in the last year quite extensively the view of Tosfos, which I looked at first because it was a sort of easier springboard to delve into the reading of Rashi in the sugya. And sort of compare and contrast it to Tosfos's opinion. So what I'd like to do is actually learn Rashi inside and use that to try and bring out the complexities around Rashi's reading of the Sugya, which indeed is very, very difficult. So the Gemara tells us that one who traps a chilazon, so machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanna Kama, if they're chayiv achatz or shtayim, based on whether Disha is a relevant malacha over here. But then the Gemara asks, what about Netilas Neshama? And Rava answers that he is Misasek Eitzel Netilas Neshama. Now, Tosfos said that this doesn't refer to the general din of Misasek, and the concept of Misasek is one is oblivious to the second action that one is doing. One didn't know it occurred, but rather this refers to the concept of Dover She'enoi Miskavein, which means to say an unintended side consequence. The crucial difference between the two halachic terms is that in the Dover She'enoi Miskavein, you are aware that what you are doing is doing something else. I'm moving a sofa, dragging it along the ground. I'm aware it's creating a furrow. I just don't care about it. As opposed to Misasek, where I am oblivious to what is happening. So Tosfos said, when the Gemara said that the reason you are exempt from Netilas Neshama is because it is mitasek, I am oblivious. It doesn't mean to say I am completely unaware of what's happening. It means I'm aware that a chilazon will die, but I don't care, it's a dover she'eino miskavein. And Tosfos proves this point from the fact that Netilas Neshama causing death is a makalkel, is damaging, and the view of Rabbi Shimon that makalkel is chayav with chabura, with injury. Why? Because Melechus Machshavos doesn't apply to this malacha, and therefore similarly, Misasek wouldn't apply to this malacha. Now, to understand Tosfos's viewpoint, we need to realize that actually Misasek is used in two different ways, or two different extremes. And I'm not going to go into the concept of Misasek in depth because it is an exceptionally difficult and fraught sugya. But basically, at the top of Ayin Beis on the base, the Gemara discusses the idea of Misasek, and Tosfos there explains that there are two levels of Misasek. There's Misasek in the whole Torah, in which a person did one action, oblivious, which was mutter, oblivious to a second action which is occurring, which is asa. In Shabbos, there is an additional halacha of Misasek, learned out from Melechus Machshavos, in which if I do an action which I am aware is asa, oblivious to doing a second action which I am aware is asa, that's also misasek. So there are technical differences in brief between misasek, oblivious to another action happening, between misasek for Shabbos and misasek of the whole Torah. Either way, Tosfos learns that our Gemara, which has misasek, is lav dafka. The language of the Gemara is a little flexible, a little inaccurate, not quite precise, and it's referring to dover she'eino miskavein, not misasek. When you see a Tosfos, by the way, doing this, willing to let a language of Gemara be a little imprecise, you realize the strength of feeling going on over here, the depth of the question that Tosfos confronts. Tosfos is convinced it's impossible to read this Gemara otherwise, and therefore has to make a Gemara lav dafka. It's a terrible situation to be in. You have a language of Gemara that says misasek, and that's to say it's a little flexible, it's a little dafka. It's not a terrible use of language. Misasek means sort of I'm not engaged with it. Normally it means I'm oblivious to it, one halachic principle. Here it means it's an unintended side consequence. But it's not a great reading of the Gemara. It's an imprecise translation of the term, but Tosfos sees no choice. Now, how does Rashi learn the Gemara? So let's have a look at Rashi. Rashi divrei masel misasek hu eitz on nusnus nama mitasek. He is engaged in something else. Kloma, that means to say, legabe netilas neshama have misasek b'davar acher. With respect to netilas neshama, with respect to causing the death of the animal, He's engaged with something else. V'lo hava melechas mashaves, and it's not melechas mashaves. She'ena miskavin shiyomus, because he has no intention that it should die. Now, Rashi, there's four sorts of key terms in Rashi that we want to notice over here. The first is that Rashi uses the phrase koloma, that means to say. Whenever Rashi uses the phrase koloma, that means to say, it's indicating that he is aware that what he's saying is not completely clear in the language of the Gemara. The second point Rashi says is, he says it's misasek b'dav. He does seem to say this is misasek, not like Tosfos. Then he carries on and he says it's not meleches mashaves. Now this is picking a direct fight with Tosfos, because Tosfos said that by Chabura, we don't care whether it's meleches mashaves or not, according to Rabbi Shimon. Because according to Rabbi Shimon, makalkel b'chabura is chayiv, meaning to say, you are chayiv even for something which is not a targeted malacha, is not meleches mashaves. So this is explicitly that Rashi is explicit that he's picking a fight with Tosfos. I mean, obviously, historically Tosfos comes after Rashi, but we learn Tosfos first in order to note what Rashi is saying. Here, Rashi is explicitly clashing head-on with Tosfos, with his later generations of students and grandchildren, and is learning that the exemption over here is Meleches Mashaves. Finally, Rashi finishes off, She'ena miskavin shiyomus. He doesn't intend that it should die. Now, does Rashi mean to say by that Dover She'ena miskavin? And is he somehow merging the concept of misasik and Dover She'ena miskavin? Or does Rashi mean, no, I'm talking about miskavin, about misasik. Misasik means I'm oblivious to the action that's happening. You can also call that Eino mitkaven, you don't have intention. It doesn't mean it in the technical sense of Hilchas Dover She'ena mitkavin, where I'm aware of the side act I'm doing, but I don't plan to do it. I'm not interested in it. He means Eino mitkavin in the simple colloquial use of language, which would refer to misasik, a case where I'm oblivious to what's happening, also as Eino mitkavin. Again, the classic example of misasik is I pick up some daffodils off the ground, thinking that they are fallen out of a vase and I'm allowed to pick them up, and I don't realize that in fact they are still growing from the ground and I'm doing kotza. This is not an unintended side consequence, it's complete obliviousness about what's happening. Nonetheless, you can call that Eino miskavin. I didn't intend to pluck the daffodils, I didn't intend to pick daffodils, and therefore what Rashi truly means is misasik. So this is the confusion in Rashi. It is clear that Rashi is clashing with Tosfos. He says explicitly the exemption is meleches mashaves. It is not entirely clear if Rashi is learning this as a classic din of misasik or Dover She'ena miskavin, though it's seemingly the simpler reading Rashi is he's learning it's Dover She'ena miskavin, it's misasik, and he just throws in at the end that you didn't intend to do this. Let's carry on with. Sorry, I'll pause there in case anyone wants to comment on my reading of the first Rashi in the Sugya. If this fits with how you all read this and how you understand Rashi, I think as a first reading of Rashi before we go into more depth. This is what I would want to share. And Rashi, these are the sort of thoughts that swish around in one's head when one reads this Rashi.
Can I just ask again, why is Tosfot still going on about Chabura? Why is Natilat Neshama Chabura and not either just Shochat or another Tolda? What's Chabura actually got to do with Etzel Natilat Neshama?
The relationship the answer is no, I'm not going to answer this now. The relationship would appear to be that of Av and Tolda, but maybe not. And we'll get into that when we look at Tosfos, Divrei HaMaschil, Ki Heicha de Leitzel Sivei. So I'm going to put that on hold and simply say that Tosfos is using them as synonymous because they're close enough, either literally the same malacha or Av and Tolda, but the concept of Makalkil he understands, and Meleches Mashaves he understands to apply to all of them, rather than just one particular one.
Can I ask, can you clarify, you said that he's saying, Rashi says that it's not mitasek, which would be something which is not intended, possibly you're saying colloquially rather than technically. Can you just explain exactly why that is disagreeing with Tosfot when he says it's not Meleches Mashaves?
Tosfos says that the exemption of Meleches Mashaves doesn't apply to Chabura, doesn't apply to Netilas Neshama. And Rashi says that the reason you're exempt for Netilas Neshama here is because it's not Meleches Mashaves. So that's a head-on clash.
Okay, yeah.
That's the one point I'm clear on in Rashi, to be honest. That Rashi says that Meleches Mashaves doesn't, the reason you're exempt from Netilas Neshama is because it's not Meleches Mashaves, and Tosfos says with respect to Chabura, we don't care about Meleches Mashaves. That's the one point. the second point that I think I'm pretty clear on in Rashi is that Rashi understands misasek to mean misasek. He doesn't learn that Tosfos that we're talking about Dovashen and Miskavin, but you could argue otherwise. He does, after all, at the end of Rashi, say that this is Einu Miskavin Shiomas. Okay, so that's the first Rashi. The second point of interest in Rashi is the continuation of the Gemara. The Gemara says, I don't understand. Nonetheless, this is a Pesik Reisha. This is an inevitable result. And the answer is no, because you don't want it to die. Why don't you want it to die? Because it degrades the quality of the color of the coloring agent, and therefore you would prefer it not to die. Lo nichale. This is the exemption called lo nichale. Now, Tosfos learns that the exemption of lo nichale is because this makes it a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa, meaning to say yet a new principle. It's not that this is an unintended side consequence. I know what I'm doing. I'm aware what I'm doing. It's definitely going to happen. Nonetheless, every melacha needs a tzrich legufa. I need a purpose. A melacha has to be purposeful to achieve something. And over here, I don't want to achieve its death because, on the contrary, its death will damage the coloring agent, the clarity or strength of the coloring agent of the chilazon tcheles dye. Now, according to Tosfos, therefore, the relevant halachic point is not that you don't want it to happen negatively. In other words, I positively don't want it to happen. It's that I'm apathetic. I'm disinterested. I don't want it to happen. I have no want for it to happen. It's not that I want it not to happen. I just don't want it to happen. I have no positive reason to want it to happen. According to Tosfos, lo ichpat lei, I don't care. I'm apathetic is enough to make it cease to be not a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. I don't need that lo nichale. I positively don't want it. Now, according to Tosfos, we do have a little difficulty in the language of the Gemara. Because the Gemara says the reason you're exempt is because lo nichale, you don't want it. But halachically, the principle isn't that you don't want it, it's that you don't care, you're not interested in it dying. How does Rashi learn the Gemara? So let's have a look at Rashi. Tzfei nichale, to the degree that it doesn't die, that's what you prefer. You prefer that it should continue to live. The live blood is better than dead blood, okay. The chivan dechol atzmo miskavein v'terech l'shomer. Since his whole self is intending and working and making an effort to guard it, shelo yomas biyado, that it shouldn't die in his hands. Afilu meis ein kan elo misasek. One doesn't have any netilas neshama, all you have is misasik. V'chimoyde Rabbi Shimon b'midi de lo ichpatzlei imis rami, u'mi yekavnei lo mechavein. Where Rabbi Shimon agrees that you are chayav for something, where that's where you don't care, but where you are mechavein, where you object positively to it happening, there everyone would agree that you are not chayav even for a pesik reisha. So says Rashi on the Gemara. Now Rashi is very clearly, again, clashing with Tosfos, and Rashi is clearly saying that it is not enough of an exemption that lo ichbas, that you're apathetic. There, Rabbi Shimon would acknowledge that for pesik reisha you're chayav. Where Rabbi Shimon would disagree is where you positively don't want it. And Rashi says this with great strength. Kol atzmo tereach, you're making an effort. You're engaged in an attempt not to cause it to die. Where you engage in an attempt to cause it not to die, in such a case, we would agree that you are potter. Now, Tosfos, first of all, this is a enormously important, potentially an enormously important machlokas in practical halacha, if we understand Rashi and Tosfos on face value, because this is an endemic to Shabbos scenarios, where I do one thing and something else happens on the side, and it's an inevitable result. According to Tosfos, you are exempt if you are disinterested in the result. According to Rashi, seemingly you're exempt only where you positively don't want the result. So this is very important. I think we spoke last week about the scenario of triggering a security camera or a security light, or lights going on and off in a block of flats as you walk down the corridors. These are increasingly common at shilas. There may be other halachic factors at work here. I'm not here interested in giving a particular pasuk about whether one can or can't do this. But I would simply point out that if we measure this by the tools of Dover She'ein Miskavin, pesik reisha, we would say as follows. So Dover She'ein Miskavin, it's an unintended side consequence that you're triggering the security camera or the light. However, it is a psik reisha, it's inevitable. Now, if I am positively interested in the result, the light enhances my passage down the corridor, down my path in front of my house, then everyone would agree that this is a psik reisha and would be prohibited unless there are other factors involved, other halachic things to think about. However, if this is my neighbor's security camera or security light, and I don't need it, and I'm not particularly interested in the security camera working with the light going on, then according to Tosfos, this would be a dovashen miskavin, a side consequence. It would be a psik reisha, an inevitable one, but it would be lo nichale in the sense of lo ichpat le. I don't care about the result, I'm apathetic. Whereas according to Rashi, that would be insufficient unless I'm positively engaged in not having the result. I don't want the light to go on. I don't want the security camera to go on. So if I am a privacy if a privacy freak, I object to being caught on a CCTV doing something innocent, like walking down my garden path, then maybe it's lo nichale. Even Rashi would agree. I positively don't want the camera to catch me. If I don't like light and I positively don't want the light to come on, then it would be lo nichale. I object to it, but it's neutral. I don't really care either way. Then according to Rashi, this wouldn't have the exemption of lo nichale because I don't care. I'm apathetic rather than positively not wanting it.
What does it mean to try with your whole self to not have something happen that we've also said is inevitable?
So if we understand Rashi's logic, what would be the logic of why you need to be antagonistic to the result rather than neutral? So if the exemption is malacha shein tzricha legufa as per Tosfos, it's that I'm only chai for malacha when I have a goal and a purpose and an aim, then Tosfos is right, Rashi is wrong. Why should I need to be antagonistic to the result? It's enough that I'm neutral, that I don't have a purpose and a name. So malacha shein tzricha legufa. However, if Rashi thinks there's a different logic going on over here, for example, the question is, to what degree is the side result inherent in my action? Then we can hear the logic of Rashi very well. Davar she'eino miskavein is potter. Why is davar she'eino miskavein potter? Because it's a side consequence. If it's a psik reisha, if it's a definite side consequence, I can't argue it's a side consequence. It's intertwined with the action I'm doing. It's bound up. I can't say I'm doing action A, dragging the bench along the ground, and the furrow being created, which is result B, have nothing to do with me. It's just a incidental side consequence to which I have no interest, because it's inevitably happening. You can't slice through, you can't dissect actions in that way when they are inevitable. It's too inherent, intrinsic to the action to be removed. In which case, Rashi would argue that apathy isn't enough. Whether you want the result or not, whether you care about the result or not, you are doing an action which has intertwined in it the second action. You can't separate it out. And I'm just standing along the bench. The furrow being created, nothing to do with me. If it's inevitably going to occur, then this is what I'm doing. This is as ridiculous as psik reisha is claiming I'm chopping off the chicken's head because I want to play football with the chicken. Whether the chicken dies or not is nothing to do with me. It's not my action. The two are too intertwined. So Rashi would argue that apathy doesn't help. However, if I object to it happening, if I'm working to stop it happening, if I'm engaged consciously in not causing the second action, but despite that it does happen, then there's a logic to the claim. I'm doing action A and action B is not what I was doing. On the contrary, I was trying to delay consequence B, the death of the chilazon, as long as possible. I don't want it to happen. I was taking steps, positive action steps to stop that result happening to the best of my ability. In that case, I can genuinely claim that action B is removed from what I'm doing. According to Rashi, according to Tosfos, it's if I don't have the attachment of a positive attention, I'm potter. According to Rashi, I need to wrench them away and detach them. Wrenching away and detaching needs a negativity, a dislike of the result. And more than that, Rashi seems to imply it's not just enough to have a conscious dislike of the result, it needs to be reflected in the world of action. I'm trying to delay the inevitable and separate the inevitable. That enough for Rashi is sufficient to wrench these two actions apart. That would be the logic of Rashi.
Well, would the language of the Gemara be supportive of Rashi? Because the Gemara says nicha, it doesn't say migra gara, because you could also argue it's worse it's a worse outcome if the color is less clear. But the Gemara specifically says nichale, so as if you have to have that kavana to keep the thing alive.
I think you're absolutely right. The language of the Gemara is much more suggestive of Rashi than of Tosfos. That is correct. Indeed, the Rishonim asked this on Tosfos. They say, why does the Gemara say Why should you bother mentioning that fact? The point isn't that you don't want it. It's the point is you're just disinterested in it dying. That should have been sufficient. So Tosfos presumably would answer that, but we'll see later. Maybe there's another answer to Tosfos. But at short level, you can say, according to the Gemara, is simply saying the truth, which is not only are you apathetic, but even more than that, you don't want it. But the halachically relevant factor is that you're disinterested. So that's how Tosfos would answer it. That halachically speaking, you don't need negativity, you just need apathy. And the Gemara just says the truth, which is actually you're more than apathetic, you don't want it. But Rashi, it seems as clear as could be that Rashi is saying you need a positive negativity. You need to directly and work on ensuring the result doesn't happen.
Why isn't Melechet Machshevet, even if you've got apathy, why can't Rashi just use Melechet Machshevet as enough to prevent you being higher?
It's a good question. We will try and look at some answers to this question. But Rashi would evidently say that Melechet Machshevet doesn't go that far. Melechet Machshevet doesn't mean Melechet Machshevet means an awareness of what I'm doing and that this result is going to happen, rather than intentionality in terms of the purpose that I wish to achieve. I should mention over here, this is intentionality means lots of different things. Intentionality can mean intention to do the action, which is the concept of Dover She'einu Miskavin, am I intending to do this action or not? And intentionality can mean purposefulness in the sense of which goal I want to achieve. Now, if I ask this Chilozan farmer, does he want the Chilozan to die? The problem over here is it depends what we mean by the word want. Do we mean proximate results or secondary results? To what degree do we mean the consequence of what you want? In one sense, he doesn't want it to die because he's at least neutral as per Tosfos, or he positively doesn't want it because it's going to damage the dye. On another sense, he does want it to happen because he's aware that the only way, if we assume that's an inevitable consequence, the only way of extracting the dye, the tcheles, is by causing the death of the animal. So you can't claim that you don't want it. Or even if we ask about the person dragging the bench on the ground and creating a furrow, do you want to do the action of creating the furrow? Well, at least if it's inevitable and you realize it's inevitable, the answer is, in a sense, you do want it to happen, because you realize the only way to move the bench is by dragging it, and dragging it will cause the furrow. So it depends how we define intentionality. This is something discussed in philosophy. Aristotle already made an error, actually. One of the few errors that are very clear-cut in Aristotle's thinking is he mixed up in several occasions these two forms of intentionality. And in Halacha this is discussed. I mentioned the Reb Chaim that over the summer holidays, if anyone has time, is well worth working through on the concept of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa and Dover She'einu Miskavin. It's the first Reb Chaim in his Kedushim and Hilchos Shabbos. I'm happy to scan it and post it on the group for those who want to do it. Reb Chaim really explicitly discusses these points, and he talks about Rotzon, which is will, Kavona, which is intentionality, Das, which is awareness and knowledge, and Machshava, which is thought. And he distinguishes between these terms. So these are terms that we use interchangeably and irresponsibly so, sometimes in halacha, and we don't zoom in on the fact that all of these things mean subtly different things. And Reb Chaim argues that a confusion in the sugya of Dover She'einu Miskavin and Psik Reisha and the machlokas between Reb Shimon, Reb Yehuda, Tosfos, and the Aruch that we discussed last week is around a confusion of these terms. And if you don't distinguish between different types of intentionality and awareness, then you will never get clear on the topic. So it's a very complicated matter what we mean by intentionality. And in halacha, this is reflected by these terms: da'at, kavana, rotzen, and machshava, 4 different terms used for roughly the same idea of purpose and intentionality. Reb Chaim didn't shut off the sugya completely. There's a lot of evidence that Rashi didn't agree with Reb Chaim's theory, that Rabbi Akiva Eiger didn't agree with Reb Chaim's theory. It's a vast topic, and therefore it's very hard to use svara and reason to determine any of the boundaries in this area. Okay, so this is the view of Rashi, in which Rashi seems to be as clear as possible that you need positive intent, the positive wrenching away of the action to a negative intention, rather than neutrality or apathy. I want to just finish off in the last 2 minutes of share a Ramban who presents a very different reading of Rashi. I do not know how the Ramban reads Rashi, but it's a remarkable Ramban. And in fact, just in the interest of time, given that we're a little bit short of time for today's Rashi, I printed this Ramban in source 8, the Chedusha Ramban. The Ramban says as follows. He says, you know what Rashi means? Rashi means to say that it's not a psik reisha. It's not an inevitable side consequence. The Gemara said, why are you exempt for killing the chilazon and Netzilas Neshama? Answer the Gemara, said, Dava Sheinu Miskavi. Ask the Gemara, but in a case where it's a psik reisha, it's a definite result, who cares about Dava Sheinu Miskavi? And it will definitely happen, even Rabbi Shimon would agree, you're chayav. On that, the Gemara answers, according to the Ramban, in his reading of Rashi, the answer is no, it's not an inevitable result. Because if you do it with care, you may not kill the chilazon. And therefore, it's not an inevitable result. Now, in terms of the maths of the sugya, this is a brilliant and simple reading. Because it completely resolves the question. The Gemara asks that the chilazon will inevitably die. The Gemara answers, no, chilazons won't definitely die. It may be true that the chilazon farmers you've seen kill their chilazons, but that's because they're careless. But a good farmer doesn't want to kill it and will take steps to avoid killing it because it will damage the quality of the tcheles dye that's been produced. And therefore, it's not a psik reisha. As soon as it's not a psik reisha, because he does it in a careful way, and we're talking about a farmer who does it in a careful way, you can't say he's confident in Shama, because on the contrary, he's taking steps to avoid killing it. Now, this is an attractive reading in Rashi on one level, because Rashi tells us that the farmer, the tcheles extractor, doesn't want to kill it, and Kol Atzmo, he's very seriously engaged with trying not to kill it. Which means to say that a layman who tries to extract chilazon, yes, maybe it'll be a psik reisha, but a professional who tries to extract chilazon is not psik reisha because they may not kill it. And you could even argue that this is inherent in Rashi, because why would he be trying not to kill it? I sort of blurred the point and I said delay the inevitable when I read Rashi. Why would he be being careful and try not to kill it if it's inevitable that he will kill it? You only try and be careful if there's a chance that you won't kill it. In which case, argues the Ramban that this is what Rashi is saying, that it is not an inevitable result, it's not a psik reisha. My only question on the Ramban, and this is in my mind a very big question, I don't know how to answer it, is it's not what Rashi says. It's very clear in Rashi that he's talking about intentionality and engagement rather than result. Now, it's true that we have therefore a bit of a problem over here, because if you're careful not to try and kill it, to try not to kill it, that means it's not inevitable that it will die, in which case it's not a psik reisha. But nonetheless, Rashi doesn't say that as his svara. Rashi says as his svara that you're trying not to kill it. And it's about intentionality, and that's the point according to Rabbi Shimon. So I don't know how the Ramban reads it, and therefore I was suggesting in Rashi that Rashi agrees it's inevitable, it is a psik reisha, and your attempt not to kill it is to try and extract as much dye from it before you kill it, but you are aware that it will definitely die eventually. So this is the Ramban's reading of the Gemara, though it's not one of Rashi, there's not one that the logic of the Ramban makes sense, but I don't really understand it as a reading in Rashi.
I wonder if
it says L'shomro, so it won't shelo yamut biado.
That's correct. That's where the Ramban is coming. You're guarding it. You're being careful so it won't die.
When Philip and I had a look at the actual physical makeup, it looks as though there's a particular gland, and we wondered whether you could just sort of squeeze it so only that gland empties, and it could remain alive.
The problem over here is, as you are aware, there's a lot of controversy around which species is the chilazon. Even if we assume it's the murex, who knows about gland extraction and techniques of doing that? So Rashi seems to say that you're struggling not to kill it. Now, if we take that all the way, that means that it's possible to extract dye without killing it, in which case it won't be a psik reisha. But that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says the svara is because of you're trying not to kill it. So
Edward and I suggested, or we sort of, I think maybe a halfway house that might help here. I don't know, but we wondered if it was possible that taking it out psik reisha, because by trying to keep it alive, you're doing lots of very gentle little squeezes, so you never actually know which is the squeeze that the chilazon is going to die with. So it's not each squeeze. There's never a psik reisha that the chilazon will die after that squeeze.
In svara, what you're saying is fantastic and genuinely so. There's a lot of discussion about what psik reisha means and how to view lots of accumulated little actions. So, for example, in halacha, it says if you brush your hair with a tight comb, it's a psik reisha because it will pull some hair out. Now, any one motion with the brush, the tight brush or the comb, won't necessarily pull hair out, but over the process of, let's say, 5 times doing it, it might. So this is viewed as a psik reisha. It depends how we view Is it the whole process of brushing hair or just each individual brush stroke and so on? So the Londos you're saying is impeccable. It's a beautiful explanation of the Ramban. But once again, I ask you, do we think it's what Rashi is saying? Does it fit the words of Rashi? And I personally struggle to see that from Rashi. I just share that with you for what it's worth. This is how the Ramban reads Rashi, which is an elegant solution to the whole sugya. It takes the sting away from the halachic conclusion of Rashi that you need to positively not want it. Maybe Rashi would agree that apathy is enough, but Rashi's making a more profound point over here that it's not even a psik resha. However, this doesn't seem an easy reading in Rashi.
Rabbi Zobin, you mentioned that there's something that could be there's something that you could possibly avoid doing if it's done by an uman, but by a regular layman, the consequence is inevitable.
Yes.
And surely it wouldn't be totally inevitable if it was done by the layman. He could accidentally, through use of no skill, not create that impact. He could unintentionally do what the skilled person does.
2 points. First of all, I don't know if that's inevitably the case, meaning it's possible that it could be something which if an unskilled person does will definitely have consequence A, and a skilled person does it will definitely have consequence B. But my point in a sense was more general than that, which is the Gemara in its question assumes it's a psik resha, and the Gemara's answer is, in skilled hands, it's not a psik resha.
Yes.
So whether the assumption was ever right or not, in a sense, is not of interest at this point.
Okay.
The point of the Gemara's answer, according to the Ramban, is it isn't a psik resha. That's the relevant feature. The Gemara's answer is, you made a mistake in your question, it's not a psik resha.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will stop there, and I look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday, and have a good day.